Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another episode of our podcast. Today it's just me again. Adam's got finals, so he's getting pretty busy, but inshallah he'll be back on the next episode. So today I wanted to take some time to talk about summer, getting us motivated to stay consistent during the month of summer, or during the months of summer, not the month, because I think summertime is a time where generally people are more free, so they have more free time, no school, but it's also a time of great fitna, in the sense where generally, people are wearing less clothing, people are doing more free mixing, and it just gives more opportunity to fall into haram, and it kind of just opens up the door a lot more. So that's what we're here to talk about today, and kind of talking about ways and things that we can do to stay consistent. The first thing that I just want to mention is that we are still in the month of Shawwal. So Shawwal is the Islamic month that comes right after the month of Ramadan. And we mentioned how there's a hadith that says whoever fasts the month of Ramadan and then follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal, it's as if he fasted for the whole year. Because Ramadan is multiplied by 10, so 30 times 10 is 300. And then you add in 6 days, which is 60, so equals 360, which is the number of days in the Islamic calendar. It's actually, I think, a little bit more. So it is a hard thing to do because it's 6 days, but the ajr is amazing, and especially if you're doing it with friends and family. And we mentioned how there is a hadith that mentioned that Aisha radiallahu anha used to make up her missed fasts from the month of Ramadan in the month of Sha'ban, which is the month that comes right before the month of Ramadan. So the scholars use this as an evidence to say that any woman who missed fasts, woman or man, but mainly women, especially because of your menstrual cycle, that you are allowed to fast 6 days of Shawwal before making up your missed days, just because Shawwal is, the ability to fast these 6 days of Shawwal is very limited because you only have a month, so the scholars say that it's okay. So I want to mention a hadith that I don't think a lot of people know, and it's actually very scary and kind of interesting at the same time. But this is a hadith that's narrated in Sahih Bukhari, where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says, "In very hot weather, delay the prayer till it becomes a bit cooler, because the severity of the heat is from the raging of the hellfire." So here they're talking about Salat al-Isha. It was a sunnah at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to delay Salat al-Isha till it would become a little bit cooler. And then he goes on to say, "The hellfire of hell complained to its Lord, saying, 'O Lord, my parts are eating and destroying one another.' So God allowed it to take 2 breaths, one in the winter and the other in the summer. The breath in the summer is at the time when you feel the severest heat, and the breath in the winter is at the time when you feel the severest cold." So, subhanAllah, this is a hadith narrated in Bukhari, but basically, we know that Jahannam isn't a place, unlike a lot of people, what they think of. Jahannam is a beast. It's I guess you could say, a living creature. Because we know the hadith and the ayat that explain when Jahannam is actually brought forth, that it's going to roar when it sees all of humanity because of the anger that it has at those who didn't follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told them to do. And when it roars this loud roar, everyone will fall to their knees, including the prophets. That's how scary it is. And we know that Jannah is actually chained on 7 different chains, and on each chain there's 70,000 angels. So there's about 4.9 billion angels just carrying Jahannam. And so when the fact that it roars just shows that it's a beast. But it talked to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jahannam had a conversation, and it basically said that akala ba'di ba'da, a part of me is eating another part of me. And this happens in our bodies sometimes, when your stomach kind of starts eating part of itself, or it's weird. But basically Jahannam is saying, I'm so hungry, I'm starting to engulf my own self, I'm starting to eat myself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it the opportunity to have 2 breaths to kind of relieve the temptation, I guess, or I don't know, the hunger that Jahannam has. 1 breath is in the summer and 1 breath is in the winter. So the heat that we feel in the summer, the severity of the heat, essentially is from Jahannam. It's a breath from Jahannam. And imagine, if you go to Dubai or places in the Middle East, it's usually super hot, and especially if it's really humid, and it's unbearable. And that's just a single breath of Jahannam. Imagine being within Jahannam or being next to Jahannam. And the other breath is during the winter, and that's when we feel the severity of the cold. But I feel like the one that really is more affecting to the heart and the mind to contemplate over is the one that we feel in the summer, especially now that we're coming around the summertime. And I find it very ironic how people in the summertime, like especially girls, they start basically wearing nothing because they're hot, but they don't understand that this is the heat of Jahannam, which essentially, like, not necessarily, like, I don't want to say you'll attain it, but like, you not wearing clothes is like on the path to attaining Jahannam, which I find is very ironic. I don't know if that made sense. But this hadith literally shows us the severity of Jahannam, and it shows us the breath and the severity of the breath of Jahannam, which is essentially the heat that we feel during the months of summer. The second hadith that I want to mention, it's actually an ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Yunus, verse 6, it says, إِنَّ فِي اخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ وَمَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَّقُونَ. That indeed in the alternation of the night and the day, and in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in the heavens and the earth, are signs for people who fear Allah. So like I said from before, generally during the summertime, people have more free time because you're not doing school. You literally have nothing else to do unless you're taking a job or you're taking a summer class. But still, in the end, you're still going to have more free time than if you were in school, like normal session. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran that in the alternation of the night and the day, there is a sign for the people who fear Allah. And when the scholars, they explain this, they say that essentially, those who are of Iman and have true Iman is the fact that they take advantage of the alternation of the night and the day. So there was, I think it's a story that's narrated, I'm not sure if it was Umar or Abu Bakr, but one time a companion saw them, and they were praying really long duha prayer. So duha prayer is a prayer that you pray after the sun rises, at least 10 to 15 minutes after sunrise, up until at least 10 minutes before dhuhr. And it is a 2 rak'ah prayer minimum, up to any even number. But it's meant to be showing gratefulness and thankfulness for every single limb of our body. Because we know that on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the opportunity, of course, He's Allah, He owns us, but we will be asked about every single limb of our body and how we used it and if we showed gratefulness for it. So this 2 rak'ah prayer, it kind of covers your whole body for the whole day and showing grateful for your whole body. But basically, they saw the companion making the duha prayer really long, and they were surprised because they never used to do that. So they asked them, why did you make your duha prayer so long? And they said, because I usually pray qiyamul layl, but last night, I don't know what hit me, I just wasn't able to pray qiyamul layl. So I made up for it by making my duha prayer relatively longer. And they say this is an example of understanding the alternation of the night and the day, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it's a sign for the people who have taqwa, the people who fear Allah. In the sense that in the winter, if you had goals and ambitions for the deen that you were not able to achieve, take your free time in the summer. Essentially, it's the concept that you use your time wisely, and you understand that we're only going to be on this world and we're only going to be in this life for a limited number of days, and to take advantage of every single day that we have. And with the alternation of the seasons, like we said, the breath of Jahannam and this heat, it's already in and of itself a reminder of the hereafter and a reminder of Jahannam. But it's also this alternation of how suddenly things change from cold to hot, especially here in Cleveland, the weather changes overnight. First of all, it should show us of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, kun fayakun, be, and it is. That's it. He just says be and it happens. So the fact that weather can change overnight, first of all, your situation, anything that you're going through, anything that you've making dua for, anything in your life can change overnight, good or bad. Also, the fact that this changing of the seasons gives you a new opportunity. It's like a fresh start. So use this summer to kind of reflect on things that you've wanted to improve on, or maybe if you haven't, take the time to do so now, to sit and think of things that you wanted to reflect on, and use this free time, because essentially you're going to be asked about this free time. And we talked about how we should benefit from 5 before 5, and one of them is your free time before you get busy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in another place in the Quran that every single thing will be asked about, even your free time. So don't waste it, and don't waste it especially doing things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might not be pleased with. And this reminds me of another ayah that's in Surah Al-Rum, and it's verse 55, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةِ يُقْسِمُ الْمُجْرِمُونَ مَا لَبِثُوا غَيْرَ سَاعَةٍ كَذَلِكَ كَانُوا يُؤْفَكُونَ. And on the day, like when the day of judgment appears, the criminals will swear that they had remained but an hour in this world. Thus they were deluded. In the sense that we have this free time now, and we're generally pretty young, use this free time, because on the day of judgment, we're going to think that this world was nothing but few seconds. So use this time that you have wisely and don't let it go to waste, especially during the summer. The next thing that I want to mention is that Shaitan is going to try to come and waswas to everyone, because that's Shaitan's job. And essentially, we said that Shaitan knows us. He knows our thoughts. He knows what temptations and what, especially like your weak points, basically. But Shaitan generally has 2 bullets. I kind of think of Shaitan like a gun, and he has 2 bullets he can hit you with, either doubts or desires. So doubts in the sense that he'll make you start doubting things about Islam, or he'll make you start doubting things about concepts like, oh, why do I have to salli 5 times a day? Why can't I just salli 3 times? Or why do I have to salli right now? I'll do it when I get home. Or like just random stuff like, why do I have to wear hijab? Why do I have to do this? He'll just make you start questioning things in the deen. The second thing is desires, in the sense that he'll make you start desiring things. You know, like, oh, look at how this person's doing this. Oh, how come you can't do this, but they can do this? And the best way to combat both of these things, doubts and desires, is through knowledge. In the sense that when you better know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you better know the deen of Islam, the better you are able to worship Allah. And like I said, since we have more free time, one thing that I think honestly is very, people don't give it its justice, me included, is the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though there's more than 99, but we know of 99. Because how can we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we don't know Him? So take this time, especially during the summer, to maybe every single day or like every single week, look at a couple of the 99 names of Allah and truly understand them. Because when you understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, you're able to better worship Him. Like for example, we said one of the bullets of shaitan is desires. Okay, so like let's say for example you're in a situation where shaitan comes to you and you're afraid that you're going to fall into something haram. One of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names is Al-Fattah. The name Al-Fattah comes from the root word fatah, which is an opening. Essentially, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-powerful, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does things through means, without means, and against means. In the sense, sometimes like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do something and it'll make sense to you how it happened. Sometimes He'll do it, but it literally doesn't make sense because it's like, it seemed impossible. Like for example, like if you're sick and you take a medicine, but you still die. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like you took the means, but that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed. And sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does things without means, like it just happens. So the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Fattah. You understand this. You understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do anything, bring about anything from nothing, and He can make a way out for you. That's the most important thing. And there's a really nice dua that I like to make, which is, Ya Allah ja'alli makhraja, to make me a way out. Like you're asking Allah, oh Allah, make me a way out, a makhraj. So when, let's say for example, you're tempted with this desire and you're afraid of falling into something haram, use this name Al-Fattah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He has these 99 names, not only does He embody every single characteristic within them, and we talked about this in the episode we talked about mercy, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that if all of us, like human and jinn, were perfect, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have wiped us out and put another creation that does mistakes, just so He can actually act out this name and His attribute of being merciful. Like if everyone's perfect, who would He show this mercy to? So the same concept, when you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Fattah, use that name. O Fattah, ja'ali makhraja, or O Fattah, help me to fight against my desires, make me a way out. So the better you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the better you are to be able to call upon Him and to kind of get a better closeness and connection towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to truly understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always by your side, and to better understand who He is, the better, like the characteristics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. And it makes you generally feel more closer, and it helps you to attain taqwa. Taqwa, we said, is God consciousness. And what did the ayah that we said, that we looked at from before from Surah Yunus, that in the night and the alternation of the night and the day is a sign for those who have taqwa. And the more you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more you develop taqwa. Because essentially, knowledge is a tool that we use to keep ourselves in check. it helps us keep ourselves between the boundaries of halal and haram. And if you were, la samah Allah, to fall into that which is haram, because it's inevitable, then you know what to do. You know how to return back. You know how to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want to mention one last hadith before we tie it all up. But I don't have the exact hadith. I couldn't find it. But it says something along the lines. And it explains how, because we talked about desires, how those are the two bullets that shaitan will use to hit you with. And now that you generally know this, try to better understand, like if you are tempted with something, to understand if it's from shaitan, if it's from the doubt or the desires, and to kind of better understand how to combat both of them. In the sense that your doubts, just you need to learn more about the deen, to look into that thing in specific, talk to someone who has knowledge. And with your desires, it's generally to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a lot of times it's best to see the importance and the virtue of having patience, which is a whole nother episode inshallah soon to come. But patience has an ultimate reward in the deen of Islam. And essentially, when you're fighting your desires and you're fighting your temptation, you're embodying the great attribute of patience. And I think it's enough said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ, that Allah is with those who have patience. And that another ayah in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, that Allah will reward those who were patient. He will reward their action of patience without reckoning. The amount of reward that comes for it is impeccable. You can't even imagine it. And also, one of the groups of people who will be under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day where there's no shade but His shade is someone who grew up, a girl or a boy, someone who grew up in the worship of Allah. They grew up learning about Allah. They grew up trying to improve their deen. Basically, inshallah, all of us. And the scholars, they say someone who's young, in the sense that cuts off at 40. So even some of our parents might still fit into that. But us, growing up with this age, learning about Islam, bettering and implementing our deen, that allows us to attain the characteristic of being under the shade, inshallah, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's throne on the day where people are sweating and even drowning in their sweat, and people are running around crazily, and people just are look like they're intoxicated, but we're just chilling under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we grew up upon His deen, or we grew up fighting against our temptations and our desires. So going back to the hadith that I mentioned, because it kind of goes hand in hand in this. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the desires of the man is the woman, and the desires of the woman is the dunya. So it basically clear-cut says that men desire women. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them. But women, they desire the dunya, in the sense that, okay, they want, they desire men as well, but it's not to the same extent that men desire women. Their main desire is the dunya. Like shopping, bags, clothes, all of that stuff. Anything in this dunya. But with this theme, in the Quran, and inshallah, this is an episode that I want to do later on in the future. In the Quran, multiple areas in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, for example, the punishment, or He mentions an ayah about attaining taqwa, especially when it comes to desires between men and women, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala almost always starts with the women before the men. For example, in Surah An-Nur, I think it's the second or third ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the punishment for one who commits zina, which is illegal fornication, basically. And the punishment, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the punishment, He says to whip the fornicator, like the girl, and then the fornicator, who's the man. Because in Arabic, you can tell the difference between the female version and the male version. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the woman before the man. And the scholars, they explain from this that generally, even though both parties play a role into it, the woman has a bigger role in the temptation of the desires. And that goes back to the hadith that I mentioned from before. Because if a man has a desire and he can't find a woman to fulfill it with, then khalas, the guy is forced to, deal with it. He has to find a way to deal with his desire. But if the man has a desire and finds a woman who will live up to that desire or go along with it, that's when zina happens. That's when the fawahish, the evil, starts to happen. And we've mentioned this before, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا, don't even come close to it. But the reason why I wanted to mention this is because, especially now during the summer, it gets really hard because, girls, they think it's okay to not wear clothes. I don't understand. but they'll literally walk out like basically naked, and it's disgusting. And we did a whole other episode talking about the virtue of Islam, and especially how the virtue of modesty, because I generally don't think like haram, like sometimes when I see women who are wearing like shorts and like stuff like that, I feel bad for them because I don't think they understand how beautiful of a thing modesty truly is. But I wanted to mention this because modesty is just more, it's a lot more than just how you dress. It's how you act, and it's how you carry yourself. So remember this hadith, and remember how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the women before the men. In a sense that we as women, that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. That essentially, like, I don't want to like undermine men, because men are like, they're very honorable, and like, especially like good guys. There's good guys and good girls. But I'm saying generally men run after the women, not the women run after the men. It kind of depends. But that's what this A is, like, it kind of showing us. So you as a woman, for all my girls out there, use that power in a way that's respectable. Don't abuse the power to that, like men, because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them. Don't abuse that desire that they have and use it towards haram. Because of course men have to like control themselves. You know, that's a whole another thing. They are held accountable for what they do and how they control their desires. But I'm talking to the girls right now, in the sense that especially in the summer, because I think it gets a little bit harder with everything that's going on. Remember the power of modesty. Remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran the women before the men, in the sense that we as women have a bigger power and a bigger influence. And essentially, you could be the door to stopping zina. I'm not saying like any of us are going to commit zina, and like I know all of us, alhamdulillah, are really good people, but be a leader for others. And like I said, modesty is more than just how you dress. It's how you act, and it's how you carry yourself. But kind of going back, tying everything together, the summertime is a very important time to not waste every single minute, you know, just like fooling around and having fun. Not to say that fun is an important thing, but when it's within the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deemed halal and haram. Remember that. And kind of as we embark on the summer and the future to come, remember to use your time wisely, and to use this time to learn more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to remember the hadith about the breath of Jahannam, because I think that's something that really helps us keep in check during these couple months of summer. Not to say you shouldn't have fun, not to say you shouldn't, you know, like go out and enjoy yourself, but just make sure it's within a sense that's halal, because we never know when we're gonna die, and I don't think anyone wants to die in a way that they're doing something that's haram, because essentially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we're gonna be resurrected the way that you died. So imagine you died and you're doing something haram. Like actually this reminds me of a story. There was a sheikh who got asked a question because there was a woman who they were supposed to do ghusl on her, and she died, and like her body was stuck in a position that looked very weird. But basically they said that she looked like she was dancing. Like when she died in a position where like her hand was on her head and her other hand was on her hip, and she was like tilted to the side a little bit. But subhanAllah, the person who was doing ghusl on her, like she couldn't really get the water to the places that it had to go all around, so they were asking the sheikh what they should do. And they later asked her family like what she did for a living, and she was a dancer. Imagine. And I'm not saying any of us are going to die as a dancer, but I'm just saying generally, like during this time of summer, we never know when we're going to die. You never know what's going to happen. So you don't want to risk being in an action or being in a state, even with your deen, with your closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially as we came right after the month of Ramadan. Don't waste that deen and that closeness that you have. Of course, deen fluctuates. It goes up and down, and that's normal. That's like how it's supposed to be. But we understand, we have this concept that the more halal you do, the more like what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks you to do that you do, the more closer you are to Allah and the higher your deen is. So instead of allowing this summer to be something that brings us far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let it be something that brings us closer towards Him. And especially now, take the time, think of things and kind of, you know, things that you want to accomplish, things that usually you might fall into that you feel like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do this year, and plan it out. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially by His name, Al-Fattah, to grant you a way out from all of that which is haram, and to help you to stay strong during these trying times, because the reward is great, inshallah. But that's it for this week's episode, and inshallah I'll see you guys next week. Salam.